No one noticed her when she boarded Flight 2191 from Boise to Seattle. She moved with quiet precision, head down, hoodie up, a worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. Her seat was 18A, tucked by the window, just behind the wing. She didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, just sat, inserted a pair of scratched earbuds, and disappeared into herself. Flight attendants marked her as low maintenance. Other passengers glanced, then forgot her instantly. She looked like the kind of person who didn't want to be remembered. But beneath that silence, beneath the ordinary posture and blank expression, sat something few people ever recognized: readiness. At 34, Wren Ashford had flown through combat zones no civilian would ever see. She didn't need attention. She didn't want it. She only needed to stay unnoticed. And for most of Flight 2191, she did. Until the captain collapsed on final approach. This is a story about courage without applause, legacy without recognition, and a ghost who flew through fire so others could breathe. Watch until the end, you'll never forget her. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in seat 18A? Subscribe for more real, human stories that stay with you. Wren Ashford didn't belong to the moment. That's what made her invisible. She boarded late, after most passengers had already stowed their luggage and taken their seats. Her steps were even, unhurried. She didn't glance around the cabin or offer a nod to the flight attendants at the door. She moved like someone used to slipping past notice. And she did. Seat 18A was hers, a window seat near the emergency exits, just behind the left wing. Not quite in the rear of the aircraft, not close to the front, just out of reach from everything. She slid her canvas bag under the seat ahead of her, adjusted the hem of her hoodie over her lap, and leaned slightly against the bulkhead. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, sleeves pulled down over old scars. The cabin buzzed with low chatter. Overhead bins thudded closed. A toddler cried somewhere in row 7. 2 businessmen in the opposite aisle compared golf scores. But Wren said nothing, did nothing. She pulled a pair of battered earbuds from her pocket, pressed them into her ears, and let her eyes drift half shut, not fully asleep, just disconnected. It wasn't apathy, it was habit. The flight attendants took notice, but only briefly. In the galley near row 14, they traded quiet observations while reviewing service notes. "Seat 18, a hoodie girl," said Rachel, the lead attendant, tapping her tablet. "No meal preference, no miles program, 1 bag, no checked luggage." "She didn't look up when I said hello," added Lisa, the new hire. "Maybe she's just shy? Or running from something," Rachel whispered, half joking. "Those eyes look like someone who's seen too much." Mark, the third crew member, smirked. "Could be a gamer, or ex-military. I've seen that look before, whole body like a coiled spring." None of them knew how close they were to the truth. Wren's military boots were worn smooth at the toes, but polished clean. Her hoodie, simple and dark, was 2 sizes too big, concealing the outline of her frame. What none of them could see, what no one ever saw, was the thin chain around her neck. Dog tags, not civilian replicas. Real. Regulation issue. The kind that clinked against your chest through Kevlar when the air got thin and loud. She hadn't flown commercial in years. This was the first time since her discharge that she'd sat in a seat without armor under it. The silence of the cabin unsettled her more than turbulence would have. No cockpit chatter, no threat proximity tones, just air vents and in-flight announcements about weather over the Cascades. She refused drinks, declined snacks, took only water. When the cart rolled by, Lisa offered her a bag of pretzels with a smile. Wren responded with the faintest nod and a whispered "thanks" that barely reached human register. The passenger, an 18-band excitable man in a sport coterie, to strike up conversation during ascent. He commented on the view, asked where she was headed, made a joke about tech conferences in Seattle. Wren didn't answer. She turned toward the window, gave a small shake of her head. The man muttered something under his breath and returned to his phone. It didn't matter. She wasn't here to be liked. Wren stared through the plexiglass at clouds painted by the sinking sun, watching the edge of the wing catch light like a blade. 35,000 feet beneath her, the world looked peaceful. Almost too peaceful. But peace is deceptive. She knew that quiet could break without warning. And that's why, when it did, she was already listening. The first sign was subtle, almost too subtle for anyone to notice. At 4:12 p.m., a chime sounded overhead. The captain's voice came on the intercom, calm at first, delivering the usual descent protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and… Then something shifted. The words slurred. Not like static, not like interference like his mouth couldn't keep up with his brain. There was a pause, a hollow kind of silence. Then a dull thud, faint but unmistakable, resonated from the sealed cockpit. Row 2 turned first, then 6, then 12. The quiet hum of routine flight was suddenly replaced by something sharper. Sharper than wind, sharper than turbulence. It was fear, slowly threading itself through the cabin, seat by seat. In 18A, Wren's eyes opened. She didn't move at first, just listened. The pitch of the engines, the rhythm of the air circulation, the tremor in the airframe that suggested autopilot was still engaged but barely. Her hand drifted to her collarbone, fingertips brushing the chain beneath her hoodie. She felt it before anyone else did. Systems were off balance. Not broken yet, but leaning. 2 rows up, a child began to cry. The cabin crew snapped into motion. Rachel unbuckled fast, heels clacking toward the cockpit. Mark followed, his service manual clutched tight against his chest. Wren sat perfectly still, watching, calculating. It took 30 seconds for the first visible panic to spread. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked steadily overhead, but no one was giving it attention anymore. A woman in 9D began whispering rapid prayers into her scarf. A man in the back tried calling for a flight attendant, hitting the overhead button again and again until the chime felt like a metronome of dread. Then Rachel came back. Her face had changed. Not the polite, polished mask of a senior flight attendant. This was a face without protocol. Pale, drawn, shaken. She didn't whisper. She didn't try to be discreet. She shouted, "Do we have a pilot on board? Anyone? A licensed pilot, military, commercial, anything?" Wren heard the words, but she was already standing. She moved with the same eerie calm she had boarded with, silent and sure. The man in 18B shifted to let her pass, but looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Others were turning now too, craning their necks to see who would answer the call. She walked forward, slow but steady, her boots making a muted thud on the carpet with each step. The cabin seemed to part in front of her, like the fear itself was clearing a path. Rachel blinked as Wren stepped into the galley. "Ma'am," Rachel started, still trying to maintain some order. "You don't understand the situation. Pop the inner panel," Wren said, cutting her off, voice low and razor sharp. "Manual override, 3-second hold, then step back." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Rachel didn't wait. Something in Wren's voice bypassed logic. It cut straight to survival instinct, the kind trained into responders when there's no time for certainty. Rachel turned, followed the instruction, pop the override. Click. The cockpit door hissed open. Wren stepped through. No one stopped her. Because deep down, everyone on board understood one thing in that moment. She wasn't asking, she was responding. The cockpit door sealed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside, the air felt heavier, tighter, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but filled with the wrong things. Shallow breathing, scattered radio static, blinking red indicators on the panel. The captain was slumped to the left, one arm dangling, head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face was pale, jaw slack. He was alive barely but completely unresponsive. The headset had fallen sideways, dangling by one earpiece. His control column drifted gently left, unnervingly loose. In the right seat, the first office rearly 30s, wide-eyed, was locked in a losing battle with the aircraft's descent. His hands gripped the yoke too tight, sweat visibly streaking down his temple. His voice, caught in a loop of frantic radio chatter, was barely coherent. "This is Flight 2190. One pilot incapacitated, requesting immediate vectors, requesting emergency assistance. We're at…" Jesus. Wren didn't wait for permission. She stepped between the seats like she had done it 100 times because she had. She slid her hand past the limp body of the captain and reached for the control column. Calm, efficient, intentional. The co-pilot jerked toward her. "What, wait? Who the hell are you?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands moved fast, eyes scanning the instrument cluster. Altitude drop, accelerating. Autopilot disengaged, roll drift, 2 degrees left. Engine power, uneven. She reached up and silenced the stall warning before it could scream. "I'm flying the aircraft," she said, voice even. Then, with full clarity, she added 6 words that would stay with him forever. "You can breathe now, I've got it." For a moment, the cockpit was still. Then the co-pilot let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He stared at her not in confusion now, but in something closer to disbelief, or awe, as if something primal inside him had just been overridden by someone who carried command in her bones. He leaned back slightly, headset still pressed to one ear. "Roger, you have the aircraft," he said quietly. From that second forward, the balance inside the cockpit shifted. Wren adjusted their heading, trimmed the roll manually, and toggled the auto throttle back to neutral control. The plane responded. She felt it in her fingers. It wasn't perfect, but it was stabilizing, at least for now. Her right hand found the radio switch. She toggled the mic. "See, TAC Tower. This is temporary pilot in command for flight 2191. Requesting immediate priority approach. Runway 16L preferred. 1 captain down. Aircraft stable." There was a long pause on the other end of the frequency. "Flight 2191. Identify yourself." Her answer came without hesitation. "Call sign Raven 1. Clearance requested under Federal Emergency Protocol 14. Another pause. Wren didn't care. She'd flown harder aircraft under worse skies. Kandahar, Ramstein, the hills outside Jalalabad. She knew panic was a virus, and it couldn't get a foothold if someone controlled the room or the air. The tower came back. "Raven 1. Approach runway 16L cleared. All other aircraft have been rerouted. Emergency services are standing by." "Copy." Beginning descent. The co-pilot stared as she worked each motion deliberate, almost silent, like the aircraft was listening to her and only her. "You're military," he finally said, voice quiet, a question and a realization in one. Wren didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked forward, calculating flap extension timing and descent angle. "Something like that," she said. And with that, Flight 2191 began its descent, no longer out of control, no longer without a captain. It now had a ghost at the helm. Wren adjusted her grip on the yoke and gently banked the plane 2 degrees back to centerline. The Airbus responded with an obedient tilt, its heavy body groaning slightly as it righted itself. The co-pilot, Mason Heller, sat beside her quiet now, hands off the controls, eyes flicking between her and the primary display. For the first time since the captain collapsed, the descent felt like flight, not freefall. Down below, emerald terrain bled into deep gray as Washington's coastline rolled beneath the aircraft. The Pacific shimmered off to the left, but storm clouds were piling in from the northwest. Thick, moving fast. Wren saw the wind shear data flash red. She didn't flinch. "What's your name?" Mason asked softly, as if afraid to shatter the moment. "Wren," she replied, her eyes never leaving the instruments. "Ashford." There was something in her tone not unfriendly, but built like concrete. Mason didn't push. He just nodded. Outside, the weather system moved quicker than forecast. The edge of the front clawed over the horizon like fingers of ink. Turbulence began to buffet the plane. Overhead compartments rattled faintly. The radio crackled again. "Flight 2191, be advised. Storm cells forming east of runway approach. Gusting 34 knots at surface. You still want 16L? Wren pressed the mic button without hesitation. "Affirmative. I've seen worse." Mason looked at her sideways. "You've flown into storms like this before?" "Twice a week," she said. "In Afghanistan. But the mountains don't come with landing lights." He didn't ask more. He didn't have to. Wren's fingers flew over the control panel with a mechanic's precision flap controls, descent profile, throttle sync. She moved with an almost surgical rhythm, as if the aircraft were more alive to her than the people sitting behind the cockpit door. At 13,000 feet, the first hard jolt hit them. Mason instinctively reached for the controls, but Wren had already compensated rudder tap, pitch correction, throttle hold. The plane straightened before his hands even closed the gap. In the cabin, Seatbelt lights blinked, and passengers clutched armrests. Somewhere in row 22, a man shouted something unintelligible. In row 6, a child sobbed into her mother's sleeve. Every soul on board now knew this wasn't routine anymore. Aircraft's heavy, Mason noted, watching her manually reset the angle of descent. Fuel load's still high. Doesn't matter, Wren murmured. I'm bringing it in clean. Another wave of turbulence tossed them. A green light flickered over the fuel crossfeed. Mason's breath caught again, but Wren just reached calmly and silenced the warning buzzer. You always this calm? He asked. I used to be worse, she said, almost dryly. Back when getting shot at was part of the checklist. He almost smiled. Almost. But what struck him most wasn't the confidence in her voice, it was how familiar she looked in that seat. Like this wasn't just a former pilot stepping in. It was someone who had never stepped out. She leaned forward, scanned the approach vector, checked altimeter sync. 5,000 feet and dropping. Wind gusts erratic. Here's what I need, she said to Mason, clear and controlled. Read back weather changes, confirm gear drop at 1,500 AGL, and keep the tower updated. I'll fly. You talk. Roger that. And just like that, the co-pilot became exactly what he was trained to be second. Wren pulled the headset tight over her ears, adjusted the boom mic, and said what she hadn't said in 5 years. Flight 2191, final approach vector confirmed. We're coming in. The cockpit was hers now. And behind the door, 162 souls waited in silence, held in the hands of someone they would never forget, though most would never know her name. The clouds swallowed them at 40 feet. What had been scattered sunlight moments ago turned instantly to steel-gray haze, the kind that pressed against the cockpit glass like a living thing. Rain pelted the windshield in horizontal slashes, and the wind shear alert began blinking amber across the console. In the cabin, overhead compartments vibrated with a low, unnerving hum. A baby cried out sharp and loud. Someone shouted for a flight attendant. No one answered. No one moved. Except her. Wren Ashford kept her voice steady and her hands still. She adjusted the pitch by half a degree, then manually dropped flaps to configuration 2. The plane rocked, nose dipped, but she was already correcting. Mason Heller, the co-pilot, read back altitude, descending through 3200, wind gusts peaking at 38, shear shifting northeast. Copy, Wren said, calm as mountain stone. Hold landing lights on full. Gear comes down at 1,500. Outside the windshield, there was nothing but swirling vapor and a suggestion of light beyond. Somewhere beneath it all lay runway 16L, Seattle's longest strip, lit end to end, but in this weather, even that wouldn't guarantee a safe landing. Mason risked another glance at her hands. They didn't shake. They didn't hesitate. Every adjustment was smooth, unconscious. Her right pinky tapped the edge of the throttle of a pilot's reflex tick, the kind you didn't learn from training manuals. You're not just ex-Air Force, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Wren didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the horizon indicator and flight path vector. Correct, she said. Special operations, he asked. Ghost Squadron, 49D, she replied quietly, if that still means anything. Mason froze. It did. Everyone in military aviation had heard of Ghost Squadron, a Black Ops flight unit, off-books missions, officially disbanded after a mission in northern Syria went dark. There were rumors of a female pilot call sign, Raven 1, who landed a wounded Osprey at night, with a blown hydraulic system and a team of wounded Rangers inside. Most thought she died 3 years ago. Apparently, she didn't. Wren toggled the gear lever. A low mechanical groan echoed through the aircraft as the landing gear extended. Gear down, Mason confirmed. Check crosswind drift, she said. We're high left. He scanned the instruments. Confirmed. Compensate 2 degrees right. She already had. The plane lurched again, a hard buffet, nose veering momentarily, but Wren pushed back without overcorrecting. She rode the storm like she had in war zones, not with brute force, but subtlety, muscle, memory. Every vibration spoke to her. Every gust met its match. From her headset, a voice cracked through. Flight 2191. Tower confirms emergency vehicle standing by. You're cleared to land? Winds 290 at 34. Visibility 1/4 mile. Copy. Final approach, Wren responded. Coming in heavy. Her voice didn't shake. In the passenger cabin, people held hands. A woman crossed herself. The seatbelt lights blinked overhead, cold and mechanical, as if pretending this were still just another bumpy descent. At 200 feet, Mason squinted through the forward glass. Still no visual on the runway. Won't have it till 500, Wren replied. That's the trick with storms like these. They make you think you're lost. You're not. She leaned slightly forward, speaking more to the aircraft now than the man beside her. Come on, baby. Just like Kandahar, you know how to do this. At 800 feet, the turbulence peaked. The aircraft shook so violently that Mason gripped his armrests instead of the yoke. Wren didn't flinch. She made micro-corrections, throttle and rudder in perfect counterbalance, neutralizing yaw with calculated foot pressure. They dropped through the last dense cloud layer at 600 feet. Then, like curtains opening to a final act, the runway appeared wet, gleaming, framed by red strobes and the glowing blue of approach markers. It rushed up at them faster than it should have. Too red, too white, Mason read, confirming the glide slope. Roger. I see it. Wren's jaw clenched slightly, her voice lowered. I'm going to plant it hard. No time for flare. Straight touchdown. At 200 feet, a sharp crosswind hit the left wing. Mason braced instinctively. Wren countered with aileron input and right rudder controlled and brutal. The aircraft fought her, but she held it centered on the line. At 100 feet, final flare. Now, she whispered. She brought the nose up slightly, throttles to idle, and let the aircraft drop firm, but clean. The gear struck the wet runway with a shudder that rippled through every seat. Wren immediately engaged reverse thrust. The engines roared, spoilers deployed. Wheel brakes hissed under pressure. The plane slowed. 400 feet. Lambay. It stopped. A full 180 yards before the end of the runway. For a moment, total silence. Then the comms crackled. Flight 2191, welcome to Seattle. Wren didn't respond. She reached forward and began the shutdown checklist, her fingers steady as ever. Engine spools dropped to idle. Lights flicked off. Switches disengaged. It was a pilot's ritual alone that brought closure to crisis. Mason turned toward her. He stopped. That was impossible. She didn't answer. He blinked, mouth half open. Wren? But the seat was empty. The headset rested neatly on the dash. The door to the cockpit swung gently open, catching air from the hallway. She was gone. No one clapped. There were no cheers, no applause, no frantic outbursts of gratitude, just a stunned, reverent silence that filled the entire cabin like fog. The plane sat idle at the end of runway 16L, rain streaking across the fuselage, engines cooling into a hollow mechanical hum. Inside, 162 passengers sat frozen alive, unharmed but unable to fully process what had just happened. Mason Heller unbuckled his harness slowly, still staring at the spot where she had been just seconds earlier. The captain remained unconscious, stabilized but unmoving. Emergency lights reflected in the cockpit windows as fire trucks and ambulances began to pull alongside the aircraft. Mason opened the cockpit door and stepped into the aisle. Passengers turned toward him expectant, confused, some trembling. A woman near row 10 covered her mouth. A teenager in the back whispered, Was that a dream? She landed us, Mason said softly, almost to himself. Who? Someone asked. Mason paused. The woman from 18A. That number rippled through the cabin like an echo 18A. Some people turned, craning their necks toward the empty row. Others looked at each other, as if trying to remember if they'd seen her, spoken to her, even noticed her. No one had. She was just sitting there the whole flight, muttered the man from 18B. Didn't say a word. Rachel, the lead flight attendant, came forward from the galley. Her hands trembled as she touched the back of a seat for balance. Where is she? She asked Mason. The woman who flew this plane? She's gone. Mason's voice was barely audible. She finished the shutdown checklist, then walked out. Gone? Rachel repeated. Gone where? He didn't answer. Down on the tarmac, paramedics rushed aboard. The captain was lifted carefully onto a stretcher and wheeled down the aisle. Ground crew extended the jet bridge as rain poured outside in sheets. The emergency lights pulsed softly through the mist. Somewhere in that chaos, Wren disappeared. Airport security would later review footage and find only a single brief clip. A woman in a black hoodie walking down the side corridor of Concourse D, head down, one shoulder slightly lower than the other, as if carrying the weight of something long unseen. No bag check, no gate exit record, no trace after the final frame. Her limp was barely noticeable. Her silence was complete. She walked through the crowd the way smoke passes through cracks, quiet, unstoppable, unseen until long after it's gone. Outside the terminal, Seattle's sky cracked open with distant thunder. News vans were already en route to the airport. Reports of a mystery pilot spread fast across private aviation channels. Some passengers gave statements, vague ones, full of awe and gaps in memory. She didn't say who she was. She just stood up and took over. She didn't even look scared. Airport operations sent a formal report to the FAA. The transcript of the cockpit voice recording would later confirm her call sign, Raven 1. But no name. No license number. No traceable credentials. What remained were questions, fragments of awe, and the lingering knowledge that 162 people had walked away from death because someone chose to step forward, then vanish again like she never existed. No medals. No photo. Just silence, and a locked cockpit door that remembered the feel of her hands long after she was gone. 3 hours later, Concourse D at Seattle-Tacoma International was a maze of uniforms, radio chatter, and camera flashes. The aircraft had been towed, passengers escorted off, the captain stabilized. But there was still no Nomino paperwork, no ID, no official record of the woman who had taken command of Flight 2191. A TSA officer, already 3 reports deep into the post-incident checklist, slammed her folders shut. "She's not on the flight manifest," she muttered. "That's impossible," said her supervisor. "Everyone's assigned. You don't just sit in 18A without being booked." "I'm telling you," the officer insisted, tapping the screen. "We've got a last-minute check-in under the name A. Wren. No frequent flyer number, paid in cash through a third-party kiosk in Boise. No ID verified at boarding." The supervisor frowned. "You're saying we let someone onto a commercial flight with no digital footprint?" "No," the officer said. "I'm saying someone didn't want to be remembered." In the control tower, Bill Kendrick, a senior air traffic controller with 22 years in service, leaned back in his chair and stared at the log. Call sign, Raven 1. It didn't belong there. Not on a commercial flight. Not in 2025. He opened a secure terminal, typed in the code for military clearance level 3, and began to dig. It wasn't easy. Most of the entries were blackbarred, redacted, or just missing. But he found something. A shadow of a file. Go Squadron 49D decommissioned. Attached. One name. Or rather, one phrase. Raven 1. Status classified. Deceased in action. No public record. His jaw tensed. He remembered the name from whispers at conferences, from a late-night beer with a retired Army colonel who'd flown joint ops out of Kabul. "She once landed an Osprey with half a tail rotor and a bleeding crew chief on her lap," he'd said, eyes wide. "Called herself Raven. No rank, no record, just a call sign passed around like folklore." And yet today, that same voice had radioed him from the clouds, requesting clearance. Coming in heavy. Kendrick sat in silence for a long moment, then slowly leaned forward and deleted the search history. Some ghosts deserve to stay off the grid. Meanwhile, inside a hotel just 3 miles from the airport, a woman stood in front of a bathroom mirror, slowly unzipping a rain-soaked hoodie. Wren Ashford caught her own reflection and didn't blink. Her eyes were tired, her face older than she remembered, but the her hands were still steady. She opened her duffel. Inside, a folded patch of worn cloth, a Ghost Squadron unit insignia. Below it, a laminated photo of 7 aviators in dusty gear, standing beside a Black Hawk, the sun behind them. She touched one face near the Centera man with a crooked smile and soot across his helmet. "Still flying," she murmured. Then she closed the duffel, zipped it up tight, and sat on the edge of the bed. waiting for the storm outside to pass. She wouldn't stay long. She never did. Back at the airport, passengers gathered at baggage claim in hushed tones. Some cried, some laughed nervously. Most just looked around, hoping to see her one last time. She had black boots, someone said. Old ones. Didn't say a word the whole flight. No name? Just 18A. The legend had already begun. Weeks later, the story had already passed into legend. News outlets referred to her as the ghost pilot of Flight 2191. Aviation blogs analyzed the precision of the emergency landing, calling it miraculous. Passengers gave interviews, each one slightly different, each one with gaps. No one had a photo. No one knew her full name. All they had was a seat number, a calm voice over the intercom, and the memory of a woman who walked through chaos like it was routine. The FAA released an incident report with redacted sections. The official statement read, Flight 2191 experienced a medical emergency involving the captain. Aircraft was safely landed by an individual with advanced flight experience, identity unverified, under review. But those who were there didn't need an official explanation. They knew what they saw. A woman with steel in her voice. A stranger who moved like memory. Someone who didn't hesitate when every second mattered. In a quiet hangar in Utah, far from SeaTac or civilian flight paths, a retired pilot stepped through a side door and stopped cold. There, painted on the wall above the lockers, in fading black stencil, was a name few were ever meant to remember. Raven 1. 49. Ghost Squadron. He stared at it for a long time. No salute, no words, just a small nod like to an old comrade seen across a distant room. Somewhere else, on a road that led nowhere in particular, Ren Ashford drove west in an unmarked pickup truck, radio off, windows half down. In the seat beside her, a new boarding pass. One way, different name, different route. She didn't need thanks, didn't want recognition. But she carried the weight of every soul she'd brought safely down silently, like a promise. Because that's what ghosts did. They showed up when no one else could, then disappeared. And the world kept turning, never realizing how close it had come to falling apart. Flight 2191 landed because Raven 1 remembered how to fly through storms. And then, as always, she vanished into them. Sometimes, the people who save us don't wear uniforms, give speeches, or ask for attention. Sometimes, they sit quietly in seat 18A, unnoticed until everything falls apart, and then they step forward with steady hands and unshakable calm. This story isn't just about aviation, it's about life. About how real strength often comes from the quietest places. About how leadership isn't about titles or noise, it's about readiness. When others freeze, the prepared don't panic, they act. Ren Ashford reminds us that you don't need permission to do the right thing. You just need courage, skill, and the will to carry the weight when no one else can. So the next time you see someone sitting quietly in the corner, don't assume they're invisible. They may be the one who holds the entire room together when the storm hits. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Share what it taught you. And if you believe in quiet heroes, the ones who never ask for credit but show up when it counts, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this one. Because sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that speaks only when the world goes silent.